Welcome to the Explainer. All right, today we're diving into what is honestly a mind-blowing historical anomaly. Seriously, if I asked you to picture the ancient gods ruling over Canaan, you'd probably imagine El, the wise creator deity sitting right at the head of the table. But here's where it gets wild. According to some incredibly fascinating historical research, Yahweh and the Canaanite creator deity El, they were originally two entirely different gods with completely different backstories. So today, we're going to dig into the source material to figure out how they eventually merged, and maybe even more importantly, where this mysterious upstart god Yahweh actually came from in the first place. So let's treat this like a historical cold case, all right? Who exactly was Israel's original god? Because Yahweh's sudden appearance in the ancient Near Eastern pantheon is frankly baffling. It's like he just steps out of the shadows and right onto the throne of history, basically out of nowhere. And to really grasp just how strange this is, we've got to investigate the very earliest footprints of this deity, way before he became the central figure for billions of people today. Now, if we look at the established history of El, we can trace him all the way back through the Amorites straight into ancient Mesopotamia. He was the benevolent head honcho of the Canaanite pantheon. He had a consort, Asherah, and kids, like the storm god Baal. But when we start looking for Yahweh in these early records, utter silence. A complete absence. He's not on any early Canaanite or Amorite lists, no recorded father, absolutely no early mythology in the region. He's just missing. So where on earth do we actually find him first? Well, our very first historical clue doesn't come from Israel at all. Believe it or not, it comes from Egypt, all the way back in the 14th century BCE. There's this Egyptian temple inscription that mentions Yahweh in the land of the Shasu. Now, the Shasu were these nomadic tribes just wandering the deserts of Edom and Midian. Literally, he was a wandering deity. Then, fast forward to 840 BCE, and we hit the Mesha stele. This is the first physical epigraphic evidence of Yahweh in Palestine, where the king of Moab is basically bragging about defeating Israel. And then, around 800 BCE, we stumble upon the Kuntalit Azure inscriptions in the Sinai desert. And get this, they shockingly refer to Yahweh and his Asherah, which strongly suggests he actually had a goddess consort. Okay, so if we map out those early footprints, all those geographical dots start connecting in a really specific way. Edom, the Seir Mountains, those wandering Midianite and Kenite tribes, they all point directly to places like the Timnah Valley. And why does that matter? Well, because under that blazing sun-baked earth, this spot was the ancient world's absolute premier copper smelting region. It was the industrial hub of the ancient world. And right alongside this intense activity, archaeologists have dug up a massive spread of Mycenaean-style pottery, which literally links this harsh desert region all the way back to the Aegean Sea. And that brings us to the crucial context for this whole era, the Bronze Age. To truly understand Yahweh's origins, we've got to look at how ancient cultures viewed metalworkers. Because back in antiquity, taking a chunk of dead, lifeless rock and transforming it into glowing, molten metal, that wasn't just some physical, industrial process. No, it was viewed as actual sacred magic. Just think about it. Across multiple ancient cultures, we see this fascinating pattern pop up again and again. Over in Egypt, you had Ptah, the patron of craftsmen who literally created the world by thought and word. You had Hunum, the god of water and metalwork, who fashioned humans on a potter's wheel. Jump over to Mesopotamia, and there's Enki, this god of wisdom and metalwork who essentially crafted civilization itself. And of course, in Greece and Rome, we've got Vulcan and Hephaestus, the divine blacksmiths of fire. The takeaway here? In the ancient Near East, creator gods were deeply, inextricably tied to the forge. They were the very vital forces of life. Which naturally brings us to a massive million-dollar question. Given those baffling archaeological overlaps, like remember that Mycenaean pottery hanging out at the Midianite copper mines, did Yahweh actually travel across the Mediterranean? And how on earth might Greek mythology, with its own super rich history of gods and forge magic, fit into this giant puzzle? Before we can answer that, though, we need to quickly define a super crucial concept: syncretism. Basically, this is the blending or amalgamation of different religions and cultures. See, in the ancient world, as tribes like the Sea Peoples migrated, raided, and relocated all across the Mediterranean, they didn't just pack up their weapons. They brought their gods with them. And as people bumped into each other, those myths naturally started to blend together over time. So keeping syncretism in mind, when researchers started looking for Yahweh's counterparts over in the Aegean, they stumbled upon some profound ancient similarities to a totally unlikely suspect. And I mean unlikely. We're talking about the Greek god Dionysus. I know, it sounds totally wild, but both of these deities share some incredibly specific symbols. Take wine, for example. Israel is frequently referred to as Yahweh's vineyard, which perfectly mirrors the divine gift of wine tied directly to Dionysus. Or what about snakes? Both gods are deeply associated with serpents. You've got the burning seraphim and Moses' bronze snake on one hand, and on the other, Dionysus is said to be born right in a nest of snakes. And then there's the worship itself. Both required an eternal flame and relentless choral singing. You've got the psalms for Yahweh and the dithyrambos for Dionysus. It's an uncanny parallel. But wait, it goes even deeper into their actual nature. Both of these gods are incredibly ethereal, almost intangible. Think about when Yahweh reveals himself to the prophet Elijah. He isn't in the raging fire or the earthquake, right? He's the fine voice of silence. Well, Dionysus shares this exact same ethereal quality. In fact, one of his ancient names is Bromios, which literally translates to the rustling breeze. They both reveal themselves not just as raw, brute physical power, but as this subtle, invisible wind. And here is the crucial point. It's all about how they operate. Both deities interact with human psychology in the exact same, highly unique way. Basically, divine madness. In 1 Samuel, the spirit of Yahweh overtakes people, inducing this ecstatic trance and contagious prophesying that alters them completely. Well, this is the exact same mode of action as Dionysus. His spirit enters his followers, the Bacchantes, inducing frenzied enthusiasm, collective madness, and a deeply contagious trance state. They don't just command from afar, they actually enter the individual to alter their psyche. This brings us to a really critical term in ancient Israel, Ish Elohim. Now, it's usually translated as man of God, but a closer look at the source material reveals it's probably better understood as man-god. Figures like Moses and Elijah, they weren't just devoted servants. They were mortals uniquely invested with divine demiurgic powers to act directly on physical elements. We're talking parting seas or calling down fire from the sky. And this directly parallels the dual human-divine nature of Dionysus, who could totally appear as just a young man walking among mortals while wielding the devastating power of a god. Okay, so we have this absolute mountain of clues. We've got the southern copper mines, the shared symbols of snakes and wine, the ethereal wind, and the ability to turn mortal men into miracle-working demigods. How does all of this possibly connect? Well, the source material points us to some groundbreaking research by Dr. Nissim Almzalog, known as the metallurgy theory, and it really brings it all together. Here's the key number, 1200. That's 1200 degrees Celsius. That is the intense, scorching heat required to actually smelt copper from ore. And in the ancient world, you simply couldn't reach that temperature with just fire alone. It required a very specific, almost magical element to boost the charcoal's combustion. It required forced air. And that smelting metaphor perfectly maps onto everything we've been discussing. Step 1, the furnace requires continuous wind from a bellows. This breath, this invisible rustling wind, that is the spirit of the god. Step 2, taking dead rock and transforming it into gleaming copper is viewed as the ultimate act of demiurgic creation. And Step 3, the patron god of the forge grants his human smelters this divine transformative power, which effectively turns these metalworkers into men of God, Ish Elohim. The bellows, acting as divine breath, literally perfectly explains the ethereal fire-based origins of both Yahweh and Dionysus. So this finally brings our historical cold case to a unified close. During the Bronze Age, there were these massive copper trade routes that linked the deserts of Edom and Canaan directly to the Aegean Sea. Ancient Kenite smelters migrated across these vast regions, and they were carrying not just their highly prized metallurgical secrets, but the worship of their patron god of the forge. Over the centuries, as these people settled, this shared deity evolved locally, eventually becoming Yahweh in Israel and Dionysus in Greece. This whole concept is just brilliantly captured by the historian Mircea Eliade. He said, the discovery and mastery of metals didn't just revolutionize how humans interacted with the material world, it transformed their very understanding of the universe. Think about that. Ancient technology, geography, and trade didn't just shape their economies, they profoundly shaped human mythology and the very nature of the gods they worshipped. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to take away from this explainer today. If the roots of these seemingly disparate ancient gods actually stretch back to the glowing furnaces of Bronze Age copper smelters, how does this ancient web of metallurgy change the way we view the origins of modern world religions?
It is a fascinating reminder of how deeply connected our human story truly is. Thanks for hanging out with me as we explored this incredible history, and keep asking the big questions.